Close your eyes and imagine a Europe on the brink of collapse. It is the summer of 1683, and the thunder of war drums echoes across the continent. A massive tide of warriors, banners of green and crescent moon fluttering in the hot winds, advances with unstoppable momentum. This is not just another army, it is the Ottoman Empire at the height of its power. Commanded by Kara Mustafa Pasha, the Grand Vizier of one of history's greatest empires. Over 100,000 soldiers march under his banner, janissaries in gleaming armor, sipahis on proud horses, artillery that roars like a storm, and an endless wave of camp followers and supplies that stretch to the horizon. Their target is Vienna, the jewel of Central Europe, a city that stands as the last wall between the Ottomans and the heart of the West. Beyond Vienna lies the road to Rome, Paris, and the capitals of Christian Europe. The siege of this city is not just a military campaign. It is a direct challenge to the future of Western civilization itself. Inside Vienna, fear grips the population. The once vibrant city, with its bustling markets, grand churches, and proud nobility, is reduced to a fortress under constant bombardment. Cannon fire smashes into the walls day and night. Trenches creep closer as Ottoman sappers dig tunnels to undermine the defenses. Supplies dwindle. Hunger gnaws at the people. Disease spreads through the cramped quarters. The defenders fight with desperation, but their numbers are pitiful compared to the vast host outside the walls. The atmosphere is heavy with dread. Whispers spread that if Vienna falls, the Ottomans will sweep across Europe, and Christianity itself may be extinguished. The fear is not unfounded. The Ottoman Empire had already reached deep into the continent before, conquering Hungary, threatening the Balkans, and even besieging Vienna once before, in 1529. Now, more than 150 years later, the nightmare has returned, stronger than ever. The fall of Vienna seems inevitable, and yet, history is never written until the final moment. Just when Europe's darkest hour approaches, hope stirs on the horizon. A king from the north, John III, Sobieski of Poland, answers the desperate call for aid. Riding at the head of an army forged from a fragile coalition of Christian states, Sobieski will deliver one of the most decisive interventions in history. At his side, the most feared cavalry in Europe, the Polish Winged Hussars, prepare for the charge that will echo through the centuries. This is not simply a battle. This is not just the defense of a city. This is the story of how Poland destroyed the Ottoman dream of conquering Europe, how a single day in 1683 changed the course of history, and how one man and his cavalry saved an entire civilization. To truly understand the drama of the Battle of Vienna, we must first step back into the 17th century, a world torn apart by ambition, empire, and faith. The Ottoman Empire, born in Anatolia and grown into a sprawling colossus, was the dominant power of its age. For centuries, its armies had surged outward, conquering Constantinople in 1453, crushing kingdoms in the Balkans, and pushing ever closer to the heart of Europe. The sultans of Istanbul commanded not only vast lands but also immense wealth, trade networks, and one of the most disciplined fighting forces in the world. Europe, by contrast, was fractured. Rival kingdoms, religious wars, and internal divisions weakened the continent. The memory of the 30 Years' War, where Catholics and Protestants had torn each other apart, was still fresh. Distrust among nations was deep, and unity seemed impossible. To many, it appeared only a matter of time before the Ottomans would take advantage of these divisions and bring all of Europe under their control. Vienna, capital of the Habsburg monarchy, was both strategically and symbolically critical. Strategically, it was the gateway to Central Europe. If the Ottomans captured it, they could flood into the fertile lands beyond and threaten the very core of Western Christendom. Symbolically, Vienna represented the endurance of Christian Europe. It was a beacon standing defiantly against centuries of Ottoman expansion. To Kara Mustafa Pasha, Grand Vizier of the Ottomans, the fall of Vienna would be more than a victory, it would be the crowning achievement of Ottoman power, an immortal triumph to present before the Sultan. And so, in July 1683, the siege began. The Ottoman host descended upon Vienna, surrounding it with a sea of tents, banners, and weapons. The defenders, numbering only about 15,000 soldiers and civilians, were dwarfed by an enemy more than 6 times their size. For weeks, the clash was relentless. Cannonballs tore into stone walls, collapsing towers, and filling the air with dust and fire. The defenders fought back with whatever they could: muskets, arrows, boiling tar, and sheer determination. But with each passing day, their situation worsened. Food stocks dwindled. Horses were slaughtered for meat. Water supplies grew contaminated. Families huddled in fear as the thunder of Ottoman artillery shook the ground. The once proud city of Vienna became a hellish prison, and hope began to fade. Letters sent beyond the walls begged for help, but would it arrive in time? Outside the city, the call for aid echoed across Europe. The Holy Roman Emperor Leopold I pleaded with allies to rally to Vienna's defense, yet many rulers hesitated. Some feared the Ottomans too much. Others distrusted the Habsburgs. Political rivalries, old grudges, and religious tensions made cooperation fragile. But one man answered the call without hesitation: John III, Sobieski, King of Poland. Sobieski was not merely a monarch. He was a warrior king, celebrated for his victories against the Ottomans in earlier campaigns. A devout Catholic and seasoned commander, he saw the Siege of Vienna not only as a threat to Europe but as a divine test. If Vienna fell, Poland itself could soon be in peril. If Christianity collapsed, what future would remain for his people? For Sobieski, the decision was clear. He would march to Vienna's rescue. The journey was grueling. Sobieski led his Polish forces alongside contingents from Austria, Bavaria, and Saxony through difficult terrain, over mountains and rivers, toward the besieged city. Along the way, stories spread of the legendary cavalry he brought with him, the Winged Hussars. These warriors were unlike any others in Europe, clad in gleaming armor, carrying long lances, and mounted on powerful steeds. They wore great wooden frames with eagle and ostrich feathers attached. As they charged, the wind whistled through the feathers, producing a terrifying sound that unnerved enemies long before the Hussars struck. For decades, they had been Europe's shock troops, breaking enemy lines with unmatched ferocity. Now, they would ride once more, this time, into history. As Sobieski's forces drew closer to Vienna, tension rose to a fever pitch. Inside the city, the defenders clung desperately to their crumbling walls, praying that relief would come. Outside, Kara Mustafa Pasha grew confident of victory, tightening the noose and preparing for a final assault. The stage was set for one of the greatest confrontations in history. And in the early hours of September 12, 1683, the armies would collide in a battle so immense, so decisive, that its echoes would be felt for centuries. The story of the Battle of Vienna cannot be understood without first understanding the power, ambition, and relentless rise of the Ottoman Empire. For centuries, this empire stood as one of the most formidable forces in world history, stretching across 3 continents, commanding vast resources, and inspiring both fear and admiration from its enemies. The Ottomans were not merely another regional power. They were an empire with global aspirations, an empire that believed its destiny was to dominate Europe and extend its influence to the very heart of Christendom. The origins of the Ottoman state go back to the late 13th century, when a small Turkish principality under the leadership of Osman I began to carve out territory in Anatolia. What began as a modest frontier state quickly grew into something far greater. By the 14th and 15th centuries, the Ottomans had established themselves as a rising power, absorbing neighboring lands and expanding across the Balkans. Their advance seemed unstoppable. Within a few generations, they had turned from a minor tribe into a force capable of challenging the greatest kingdoms of Europe. One of the pivotal moments in their ascent came in 1453, with the fall of Constantinople. For centuries, the Byzantine Empire had stood as the last remnant of Rome, guarding the gateway between East and West. Its capital, Constantinople, was one of the richest and most heavily fortified cities in the world. Yet, under the leadership of Sultan Mehmed II, known as Mehmed the Conqueror, the Ottomans achieved what countless others had failed to do. They breached the mighty Theodosian walls with their massive cannons and stormed the city. The fall of Constantinople sent shockwaves across Christendom. It was more than the loss of a city. It was the end of an era. The Byzantine Empire, heir to Rome, was extinguished, and in its place, the Ottoman Empire rose to claim its legacy, with Constantinople renamed Istanbul's their new capital. The Ottomans gained control of the Bosporus Strait, the vital link between the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. This not only gave them immense strategic power, but also made them the central hub of trade between East and West. Wealth flowed into their coffers, fueling their armies, their palaces, and their ambitions. From this new capital, the sultans looked westward with growing determination. Europe, divided by rivalries and weakened by religious conflict, seemed vulnerable. And the Ottomans, with their disciplined armies and brilliant commanders, were poised to take advantage. The Ottoman military machine was one of the most advanced of its time. At its heart were the Janissaries, an elite corps of infantry soldiers recruited through the Devshirme system, in which Christian boys from conquered territories were taken, converted to Islam, and trained to serve the Sultan. These soldiers were fiercely loyal, highly trained, and among the best fighters of the age. Backed by powerful cavalry forces, deadly artillery, and a vast navy, the Ottoman armies became a nightmare for their enemies. Wherever they marched, kingdoms trembled. The empire expanded rapidly through both conquest and diplomacy. In the Balkans, Serbia, Bulgaria, and Bosnia fell under Ottoman control. Hungary was crushed at the Battle of Vienna in 1526, leaving much of Central Europe exposed. The Ottomans did not merely conquer territory, they reshaped the political and cultural landscape. Their administration was efficient. Their taxation system ensured a steady flow of revenue, and their tolerance of different faiths allowed them to rule over diverse populations without constant rebellion. Yet at the same time, their ambition seemed limitless. Perhaps the clearest sign of this ambition came under Sultan Suleiman I, known to history as Suleiman the Magnificent. Reigning from 1520 to 1566, Suleiman expanded the empire to its greatest territorial extent. His armies marched deep into Europe, reaching the gates of Vienna in 1529. Though that siege ultimately failed due to logistical difficulties and bad weather. It marked a turning point. Europe realized, perhaps for the first time, just how dangerous the Ottoman advance had become. The idea that Vienna, the stronghold of the Habsburg monarchy, could fall shook the continent to its core. But the Ottomans did not relent. For the next century, they pressed against Europe's borders again and again. They dominated the Mediterranean, clashing with European powers at sea. They secured control over North Africa and threatened Spain and Italy. In the Balkans, they solidified their hold, pushing ever closer toward the heart of the continent. To many in Europe, the Ottomans appeared unstoppable. Their empire was vast, their armies were disciplined, and their sultans were ambitious rulers who saw themselves not only as kings but as heirs to the Roman Caesars and leaders of the Islamic world. Religion added another layer to this conflict. For the Ottoman sultans, war against Christian Europe was often framed as jihad, a holy struggle. Victories were celebrated as proof of divine favor, and defeats were rare enough to seem only temporary setbacks. For Christian Europe, the Ottomans represented an existential threat, a challenge not just to political power but to faith itself. The clash between these two worlds was as much spiritual as it was military, and the fear of Ottoman conquest haunted Europe for generations. By the 17th century, the Ottoman Empire had reached its zenith. Its influence stretched from the deserts of Arabia to the plains of Hungary, from the mountains of Persia to the shores of Algeria. Its wealth was immense, its culture flourishing, its armies feared. Yet with success came greater ambition. The sultans and their viziers no longer aimed only to secure borders or dominate trade, they sought to reshape the very balance of power in Europe. Vienna, the seat of the Habsburgs, was the key. Its location at the crossroads of Central Europe made it both a prize and a threat. If Vienna fell, the road into Germany, Italy, and beyond would lie open. The Ottoman armies would have access to the Danube, a river that could carry them deep into the heart of Europe. More importantly, Vienna represented the symbolic resistance of Christian Europe. Its capture would be a devastating psychological blow, proving that no city, no kingdom, and no faith could resist the Ottoman advance. Thus, the stage was set for the Great Confrontation of 1683. For decades, the Ottomans had prepared, watching Europe's divisions and waiting for their chance. When Kara Mustafa Pasha gathered the great host of the empire and marched toward Vienna, it was the culmination of centuries of ambition. The empire had risen from humble beginnings to become one of the most powerful forces in human history. And now, standing at the gates of Vienna, it sought nothing less than the conquest of Europe itself. The summer of 1683 was unlike any other in the history of Europe. Vienna, the proud capital of the Habsburg Empire, stood as a glittering symbol of power and culture. But beneath its majestic spires and bustling streets, an air of dread lingered. On the horizon, like a dark storm gathering strength, the Ottoman Empire advanced once more, carrying with it the weight of centuries of conquest. This was no ordinary army, it was one of the largest the world had ever seen. Commanded by the Grand Vizier, Kara Mustafa Pasha, over 100,000 soldiers marched under the banner of the Crescent, armed with cannons, siege equipment, and the burning ambition to bring Christendom to its knees. Their target was Vienna, the last great bulwark between the Ottoman tide and the heart of Europe. By mid-July, the Ottoman host arrived outside the city walls, their encampments stretching for miles. To the defenders within, it was a sight of almost supernatural terror. The Ottomans encircled Vienna like a tightening noose, their banners fluttering in the hot wind, their drums echoing across the fields. Kara Mustafa's plan was simple: starve the city, batter its walls, and deliver Vienna as a prize to his sultan. For him, this was more than just a military campaign, it was an opportunity to carve his name into history as the conqueror of Europe. Inside Vienna, the situation was grim. The city, unprepared for such a massive siege, had only around 15,000 defenders, a mix of soldiers, citizens, and hastily armed volunteers. They were led by Count Ernst Rudiger von Starhemberg, a seasoned commander but a man fully aware of the desperate odds stacked against him. Supplies were limited, food was scarce, and the morale of the population wavered as rumors spread of the Ottoman numbers. The walls of Vienna, though formidable, had not been built to withstand the modern artillery and mining tactics the Ottomans had perfected. Each day, as cannon fire rumbled against the fortifications and enemy sappers dug beneath the earth, the defenders knew they were living on borrowed time. The first days of the siege were marked by relentless bombardment. Ottoman cannons opened fire on the city, shaking buildings and tearing breaches into its defenses. Residents huddled in cellars, praying, while soldiers scrambled to patch the walls with whatever they could find: timbers, earth, and rubble. The enemy's artillery was so constant that the sound became part of daily life, a ceaseless thunder reminding the Viennese that death was never far away. To make matters worse, food supplies dwindled quickly. Bread became scarce, meat disappeared from the markets, and hunger gnawed at the city's stomach. Diseases soon followed, spreading through the cramped quarters where refugees and soldiers lived side by side. But if the Ottomans expected Vienna to collapse quickly, they were mistaken. Von Starhemberg, though wounded during the siege, inspired his men to fight with courage and discipline. Every breach in the wall was met with desperate counterattacks. When Ottoman sappers detonated mines beneath the fortifications, creating deadly explosions that tore apart sections of the walls, the defenders rushed forward to fill the gaps with earthworks, logs, and sheer determination. Even the citizens' men, women, and children joined in the defense, carrying stones, water, and supplies to the weary soldiers. The siege was not only a battle of weapons, but a struggle of willpower, endurance, and faith. Kara Mustafa, however, was patient and calculating. He avoided reckless assaults that might cost him too many men, preferring instead to tighten the noose with each passing week. His strategy was to slowly strangle Vienna, breaking its defenses one section at a time, while starvation and disease weakened the city from within. By late August, the walls were visibly crumbling, and morale inside Vienna reached its lowest point. Starhemberg sent desperate pleas for aid to the Holy Roman Emperor and neighboring allies. Knowing that without outside help, Vienna's fall was inevitable, the defenders' struggle during those long weeks became legendary. Imagine the sight. At night, the city glowed with the fires of burning homes, struck by Ottoman shells, while the silhouettes of soldiers worked frantically to repair the damage. The stench of death hung in the air: fallen comrades, disease-ridden corpses, and the refuse of tens of thousands living under siege. Yet, despite the misery, Vienna refused to surrender. The city's defenders fought not only for their lives but for the survival of Europe itself. They knew that if Vienna fell, the road to the heart of Christendom would lie open. Kara Mustafa's forces, meanwhile, dug ever closer to the heart of the city. Siege tunnels crept under the walls, packed with gunpowder meant to shatter the fortifications from below. The Ottomans launched repeated assaults, testing the defenders' resolve, hurling wave after wave of infantry at the breaches. Some of these attacks succeeded in breaking into the outer defenses, only to be met by ferocious counterattacks from the defenders, who fought with a kind of desperate fury born of hopelessness. Every street became a battlefield, every tower a final redoubt. By early September, the situation had become dire. Starhemberg himself admitted in letters that the city could not hold out much longer. Supplies were nearly exhausted, ammunition was running low, and the defenders were stretched to their breaking point. Many wondered how much longer they could endure before Vienna finally collapsed into Ottoman hands. Outside the walls, Kara Mustafa prepared for the final assault, confident that the city was on the verge of surrender. He even sent messengers to demand Vienna's submission, but Starhemberg's reply was defiant. The city would fight to the last. It was at this moment, when Vienna teetered on the edge of destruction, that word began to spread of relief forces marching toward the city. But inside Vienna, those whispers seemed like faint rumors, almost too good to be true. Could anyone really arrive in time to save them? For the defenders, each passing hour was agony. They could hear the digging of Ottoman tunnels beneath their feet, feel the ground shake with each explosion, and see the enemy banners drawing ever closer to the heart of the city. Yet they held on, driven by faith, by duty, and by the desperate hope that help might yet arrive. The Siege of Vienna in 1683 was not just a military confrontation, it was a test of endurance on a scale rarely seen in history. For nearly 2 months, a small garrison and a terrified population stood against one of the largest armies ever assembled in Europe. Their courage bought precious time, delaying the Ottoman advance and creating the conditions for one of history's most dramatic rescues. When relief finally did come, it would arrive in thunderous fashion, with cavalry charges that would echo across the ages. But in those desperate weeks, before salvation appeared, it was the defenders of Vienna, hungry, exhausted, and outnumbered, who held the line against overwhelming odds and ensured that Europe would have a chance to fight another day. As Vienna teetered on the brink of destruction, the desperate pleas of its defenders echoed across Europe. Countless letters and envoys carried urgent messages to the courts of kings and emperors, describing the horrors of the Ottoman siege. Walls shattered by relentless cannon fire, streets littered with rubble and corpses, civilians huddling in fear, and soldiers fighting a battle that seemed hopeless. For the rulers of Europe, these were not just reports of military conflict, they were warnings of a catastrophe that could change the continent forever. The threat posed by the Ottoman Empire was immense. By 1683, the Ottomans had not only proven themselves as masters of siege, warfare, and military strategy, but had also displayed a terrifying ability to exploit Europe's political divisions. Kingdoms squabbled over borders, princes argued over religious differences, and alliances were fragile at best. It would have been easy for European rulers to ignore Vienna's plight, to assume the city was lost or that the problem was someone else's to solve. Yet the city's fall would not remain a local disaster. It would be a turning point that could alter the fate of all Christendom. Amid this uncertainty, one man stood ready to act with unwavering resolve. John III, Sobieski, King of Poland. Sobieski was not just a monarch. He was a warrior king, seasoned on the battlefield, deeply patriotic, and fiercely devoted to defending Christianity. He understood the stakes of the Vienna crisis better than most. If the Ottoman Empire succeeded in capturing the city, not only would Austria be shattered, but the entire European balance of power would tilt in favor of the Ottomans. Sobieski's own kingdom would soon find itself vulnerable, and the dreams of Ottoman expansion would be unstoppable. Sobieski's reputation preceded him. He had distinguished himself in numerous campaigns against the Ottomans in Eastern Europe, earning respect as both a tactician and a fearless fighter. His cavalry, the legendary Winged Hussars, were feared across Europe for their skill, speed, and devastating impact on enemy formations. Sobieski's arrival was therefore not just a political decision, it was a military necessity. His experience, combined with the discipline and morale of his troops, represented the single greatest hope of Vienna's defenders. Meanwhile, the Holy Roman Empire and Austria recognized the urgency of the situation. Emperor Leopold I, though stretched by internal conflicts and wary of relying on foreign allies, understood that without help, Vienna would fall. Negotiations began with the neighboring states of Europe, culminating in the formation of the Holy League, a coalition of forces united not just by politics, but by the shared imperative to defend Christendom from Ottoman expansion. It was a rare moment in Europe's fractured history when religious and political motives aligned to produce a united military front. The Holy League, however, faced many challenges. Coordination among its members was difficult. Rivalries and disagreements over command, supplies, and strategy threatened to undermine the alliance before it could even act. Yet the severity of the siege forced these differences aside. Diplomacy moved quickly, and with Sobieski's agreement to join the effort, the coalition gained a powerful and decisive force. The Polish king agreed to lead his army to Vienna, a journey that would require endurance, planning, and extraordinary courage. His commitment inspired others in Europe to contribute what forces they could spare, creating a coalition capable of confronting the vast Ottoman army. The march to Vienna was itself a monumental task. Sobieski and his army traveled across mountains, rivers, and difficult terrain, all while maintaining readiness for battle. The logistics were daunting. Thousands of soldiers required food, horses needed forage, and artillery had to be transported through challenging landscapes. Yet Sobieski's leadership ensured discipline and organization. Along the way, local allies joined the march, reinforcing the Polish contingent with Austrian and German troops, all eager to relieve Vienna and defend their homelands from the Ottoman threat. As the army approached the Austrian border, the anticipation grew. Vienna's defenders, exhausted and demoralized, received word that reinforcements were on the way. For the citizens and soldiers alike, this was a moment of renewed hope, a signal that the siege might yet be broken. Messages passed into the city, carried by scouts and couriers, describing the size and strength of Sobieski's approaching force. Even in the darkest moments of the siege, the defenders now knew they were not alone. Sobieski himself was acutely aware of the magnitude of the challenge. Leading the relief force was not simply a matter of arriving at Vienna. He would need to coordinate with the city's defenders, navigate the terrain against a numerically superior enemy, and time his assault perfectly. Any misstep could lead to disaster. Yet, his confidence was bolstered by the skill and morale of his troops, particularly the Winged Hussars. These elite cavalrymen were not only formidable in battle, but they also symbolized hope and courage for the besieged city. Their reputation alone struck fear into the hearts of the Ottomans, and their charge would soon become the decisive moment of the siege. The coalition's march also had symbolic significance. Europe, often divided by language, religion, and political rivalry, was now united under a common cause. The combined effort of Poland, Austria, and other members of the Holy League represented more than military strategy. It represented the defense of a civilization and a shared way of life. The defenders of Vienna, witnessing the approach of their allies, were inspired by this unity. Realizing that the outcome of the siege was no longer determined solely by their dwindling numbers and desperate courage. For Kara Mustafa and the Ottoman command, the news of approaching reinforcements must have been alarming. The siege had been carefully planned to crush Vienna before any aid could arrive. The long months of bombardment, tunneling, and encirclement had brought the city close to surrender. Now, a well-coordinated relief force threatened to reverse their gains and potentially annihilate their army. Tension and uncertainty began to creep into the Ottoman ranks. The defenders' resilience, combined with the arrival of a formidable army under Sobieski, set the stage for a confrontation that would determine not just the fate of Vienna, but the destiny of Europe itself. By early September, the coalition was within striking distance. Sobieski's careful planning, the coordination with Austrian commanders, and the sheer determination of the Holy League created a sense of inevitability. The Siege of Vienna could be broken. Soldiers within the city watched anxiously as scouts reported the approach of cavalry banners glinting in the sunlight. The sound of drums, signaling the advance of reinforcements. Hope, long absent, began to grow. What had seemed like a doomed defense now carried the possibility of salvation. The call for aid had been answered, and the defenders of Vienna were no longer alone. The combined forces of Poland, Austria, and the Holy League represented the culmination of diplomacy, military skill, and shared purpose. The stage was now set for a confrontation that would resonate through history, a battle in which courage, strategy, and timing would determine whether Christendom would stand or fall. The desperate struggle of the city's defenders had bought time, but it was the arrival of Sobieski and his coalition that offered a true chance at victory. The morning of September 12, 1683, broke with an eerie calm over the fields surrounding Vienna. The air was heavy with anticipation, as though nature itself paused to witness the momentous clash about to unfold. On one side, the Ottoman army stretched across miles of encampments, a seemingly endless sea of banners, cannon, and disciplined infantry. On the other, the allied forces of the Holy League Polish, Austrian, and German contingents assembled in tight formation, their armor gleaming in the early light. The tension was palpable. This was more than a battle, it was a confrontation that would decide the fate of Europe. For weeks, the city's defenders had endured the relentless siege, their courage tested against impossible odds. Now, outside the walls, the relief army led by King John III, Sobieski, prepared to strike. Sobieski himself rode at the center of his forces, his presence radiating confidence and resolve. His famed winged hussars were arrayed in their fearsome formation, lances poised, horses stamping impatiently on the grass. These elite cavalrymen were the embodiment of Polish martial skill, their feathered wings producing an almost otherworldly rustle that would soon echo across the battlefield. Every soldier, every commander, understood the stakes. This was not merely a battle for territory, it was a battle for the survival of Christendom. The Ottomans, confident in their numbers and experience, had spent weeks preparing for the confrontation. They had entrenched positions, artillery placements, and carefully designed formations. Janissaries lined the front, disciplined and ready to fire volleys of muskets, while Sipahis and other cavalry units waited to exploit any weakness. Kara Mustafa Pasha, commanding the Ottoman forces, knew that the defenders inside Vienna were desperate, yet he underestimated the morale and determination of the approaching relief army. To him, the siege had already weakened Vienna, and he expected the Allies to falter before the might of his formidable forces. As the sun climbed higher, the armies moved into position. The sound of drums, horns, and shouted commands reverberated across the plains. Dust rose from the movement of tens of thousands of troops, merging with the morning mist to create a surreal, almost apocalyptic scene. Infantry formed solid lines. Pikemen braced their stances, and artillery crews adjusted their cannons. Scouts and skirmishers darted between the opposing lines, testing reactions and gauging strength. For anyone witnessing this moment, it was clear. What was about to unfold would be a clash of titans, a monumental engagement unlike any seen in decades. Sobieski, ever the tactician, had prepared a plan to exploit both the terrain and the strengths of his forces. The main body of the army would engage the Ottomans in a coordinated assault, drawing their attention and fixing their lines. The elite winged hussars, meanwhile, would remain in reserve, ready to deliver a decisive charge at the perfect moment. This strategy required patience, discipline, and precise timing qualities Sobieski's men had mastered through years of rigorous training and battlefield experience. The Polish king himself knew that a premature attack could be disastrous. The fate of Vienna and Europe hung in the balance. At the first clash of volleys, musket fire erupted across the field, followed by the roar of cannon. The Ottomans responded with disciplined volleys from their janissaries, the thunder of gunpowder shaking the ground. Smoke curled into the sky as soldiers fell and rose again, weaving through chaos and confusion. Cavalry units engaged in swift skirmishes on the flanks, testing the enemy and probing for weaknesses. The battle was a brutal test of endurance, with both sides sustaining heavy casualties in the opening hours. Yet, amid the carnage, morale remained high on the side of the Allies. The defenders of Vienna, watching from the city walls, cheered as they saw their saviors stand firm against the overwhelming might of the Ottomans. Throughout the day, the fighting escalated. Infantry clashed in dense formations, swords and pikes meeting in violent, grinding struggle. Cannons boomed, sending volleys of shot through the ranks. tearing both men and horses from their positions. The Ottomans pushed forward, attempting to envelop the Allied flanks, but Sobieski's careful positioning and the courage of his troops held the line. Each advance was met with fierce resistance, and each counterattack pushed the enemy back. The battlefield became a maelstrom of chaos and courage, a swirling panorama of smoke, blood, and the clash of steel. The key to the Allies' endurance was the cohesion of their forces. Despite being drawn from multiple kingdoms, the Polish, Austrian, and German contingents fought with a unified purpose. Communication was constant, messengers running between units, and commanders coordinating maneuvers across the fog of battle. Sobieski's leadership inspired not only respect but fierce loyalty, and every soldier understood that the outcome of this day would be remembered for centuries. It was a clash where discipline, courage, and strategy met raw power and ambition head-on. As the day wore on, fatigue began to set in. Soldiers were drenched in sweat, horses stumbled over the churned earth, and the wounded cried out for help. Yet, even in exhaustion, neither side relented. The Ottoman forces pressed forward, their numbers overwhelming in appearance, but the precision and timing of the Allied formations blunted each assault. For the defenders of Vienna, watching from the walls, every hour that the relief army held the field was a triumph of hope over despair. Then, as the sun began its descent, Sobieski saw the moment he had been waiting for. The Ottoman lines, though formidable, had been softened by hours of sustained combat. The time had come for the decisive action that would determine the battle. From the center of the Allied army, Sobieski led the charge of the Winged Hussars. Horses thundered forward, their polished armor reflecting the dying light, feathers rustling like a storm across the plains. Lances lowered, and the Hussars plunged into the Ottoman lines with unstoppable force. The charge was catastrophic for the Ottomans. Their formations, disciplined but unprepared for the shock of the elite cavalry, began to collapse. Soldiers fell in waves, cannons were abandoned, and morale crumbled under the sudden, overwhelming onslaught. The sight of the Winged Hussars, combined with the steadfast resistance of the Allied infantry, broke the Ottoman center and forced a general rout. What had been a massive army, poised to conquer Vienna and all of Europe beyond, was now thrown into disarray, fleeing the battlefield in confusion and panic. By nightfall, the battlefield was littered with the remnants of a conflict that had raged for hours. Thousands of soldiers lay dead or wounded, the ground torn by artillery and cavalry charges. Yet amid the devastation, the Allies stood victorious. Vienna was saved, the Ottoman advance halted, and a turning point in European history had been achieved. The courage, discipline, and strategic brilliance displayed on both sides would be remembered forever. But it was Sobieski and his coalition who had turned despair into triumph, proving that even the mightiest forces could be overcome by skill, determination, and timing. The clash of titans on the fields outside Vienna was more than a military engagement. It was a defining moment for Europe. It demonstrated the power of unity, the importance of leadership, and the extraordinary bravery of soldiers willing to face overwhelming odds. This battle would become legend, its memory etched in the annals of history, a testament to the courage of those who fought to defend not just a city, but the fate of an entire continent. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows over the fields surrounding Vienna, the tension between the two massive armies reached its breaking point. The battle had raged for hours, with both sides sustaining heavy casualties, and the outcome still hung in the balance. The defenders of Vienna, exhausted and bloodied from weeks of siege, could only watch and pray from behind their battered walls. Across the plains, King John III Sobieski surveyed the battlefield, his keen eyes searching for the moment when he could strike with decisive force. He knew that the success of the entire campaign rested on a single, bold maneuver: the charge of the Polish Winged Hussars. The Winged Hussars were unlike any cavalry the world had ever seen. Their armor gleamed in the sunlight, polished to perfection and adorned with intricate decorations, while enormous feathered wings attached to their backs produced a distinctive rustling sound that intimidated enemies even before the charge began. Their lances, up to 5 meters long, were deadly weapons capable of piercing multiple enemy lines in a single thrust. Mounted on powerful, trained horses, these warriors were the pride of Poland, renowned for their courage, discipline, and unmatched battlefield effectiveness. Sobieski knew that if the Hussars struck at the right moment, they could break the Ottoman center and turn the tide of history. For hours, Sobieski had positioned his forces carefully. The infantry engaged the Ottomans, holding their lines and absorbing the brunt of the enemy's strength. Artillery fired relentlessly, softening the Ottoman defenses and causing chaos among their ranks. Cavalry units on the flanks harassed enemy formations, probing for weaknesses and keeping the Ottomans off balance. All the while, Sobieski waited, understanding that timing was everything. Too soon, and the charge might be blunted. Too late, and the Ottomans might regain control. Finally, as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, he gave the order. The Hussars moved forward, their formation tight and disciplined, horses prancing and stamping in anticipation. The feathered wings atop their armor caught the light and created an almost supernatural image, like a wave of angels descending upon the battlefield. Drums and trumpets sounded the signal, and with a thunderous roar, the cavalry surged ahead. The ground shook under the pounding hooves, and dust clouds billowed into the sky, obscuring the view of the enemy and adding to the chaos that Sobieski's forces had engineered. When the hussars hit the Ottoman lines, the effect was devastating. Janissaries, disciplined and battle-hardened, were unprepared for the sheer shock of the assault. Lances drove through their formations with deadly precision, breaking the cohesion of soldiers who had fought countless battles across Europe. Cavalry units on the Ottoman flanks attempted to counter, but the momentum of the charge was unstoppable. The hussars plowed forward, their speed, mass, and ferocity creating panic and confusion. The sound of metal against metal, the screams of men and horses, and the thunder of hooves made it clear that nothing could stand against this force. Sobieski himself led from the front, inspiring his men by example. He rode among his troops, striking fear into the enemy while bolstering the courage of his own soldiers. His leadership was decisive. Every maneuver, every thrust of the lance, was part of a coordinated plan to maximize the impact of the charge. The Ottoman army, despite its size and experience, began to crumble. Commanders shouted orders that were impossible to enforce in the chaos, and soldiers fled or surrendered under the relentless pressure. The center of the Ottoman formation, once unyielding, shattered under the weight of Sobieski's elite cavalry. The charge was not just a military maneuver, it was a psychological blow. The Ottomans had faced cavalry before, but nothing like the Winged Hussars. Their fearsome appearance, combined with the precision and brutality of the attack, created a sense of inevitability. Defeat seemed certain. Desertion spread among Ottoman ranks, and units that had fought bravely in other campaigns now broke and ran. The battlefield, which had been chaotic and deadly throughout the day, turned into a scene of mass rout. Sobieski's charge had achieved exactly what he intended, a decisive breach that would lead to total victory. Behind the hussars, the infantry advanced, exploiting the gaps created by the cavalry. Artillery crews moved forward to target fleeing soldiers, while skirmishers pressed the attack on the flanks. The coordination between units was flawless, a testament to Sobieski's strategic genius. The Ottomans, overwhelmed by the combination of shock, firepower, and disciplined pursuit, could no longer mount an organized defense. What had seemed like an unstoppable army just hours before was now in full retreat, scattering across the plains in panic. The victory was monumental. Vienna, long besieged and on the brink of surrender, was saved. The Ottoman threat to Central Europe was halted, and the momentum of their expansion westward was broken. The charge of the Winged Hussars became legendary not only for its immediate impact on the battlefield, but for its enduring influence on military history. It demonstrated the power of elite cavalry when used with timing, coordination, and audacity. It showed that even against overwhelming numbers, disciplined, courageous, and well-led forces could achieve victory. The aftermath of the charge was equally dramatic. Thousands of Ottoman soldiers lay dead or captured, their artillery seized or destroyed. The survivors retreated toward Hungary, their morale shattered, carrying with them the story of the legendary cavalry that had struck fear into the heart of their empire. Sobieski's forces, though victorious, had also endured significant losses, a reminder of the intensity and brutality of the confrontation. Yet the victory was complete, and its significance was immediate. The city of Vienna was secure. The Ottoman advance was stopped, and the balance of power in Europe had shifted. The Winged Hussars' charge would echo through history, celebrated in art, literature, and military studies for centuries to come. It was not only a tactical masterstroke, but a symbol of courage, determination, and the defense of civilization. Soldiers and commanders alike recognized that this single moment had changed the course of the siege, and in doing so, altered the destiny of Europe. The bravery of Sobieski and his cavalry had turned a desperate situation into a triumph of skill, strategy, and sheer audacity. As the sun set over the battlefield, the surviving hussars rode among the fallen and the fleeing, their lances raised in victory. The fields of Vienna, once poised for conquest, were now a testament to the power of leadership, courage, and unity. The charge had been decisive, legendary, and historic, a moment where the bravery of a few elite warriors had determined the fate of millions. It was the culmination of months of planning, weeks of siege, and hours of brutal combat, and it would be remembered as one of the most extraordinary cavalry actions in all of history. As the dust settled on the fields outside Vienna, the magnitude of the Ottoman defeat became painfully clear. The once mighty army, which had threatened to sweep across Europe and crush the city, was now in utter disarray. Men fled in every direction, artillery and supplies abandoned in their haste, banners trampled into the mud. The meticulously trained janissaries, the disciplined Sipahes, and countless auxiliary units, all of them, Seasoned veterans of campaigns across Europe and Asia were now broken and demoralized. Chaos reigned, and the Ottoman military machine, feared across continents, had been rendered impotent in a single, dramatic day. The collapse of the Ottoman lines did not happen gradually. It was a sudden, catastrophic breakdown triggered by the relentless Allied assault and, most decisively, the charge of the Polish Winged Hussars. Sobieski's cavalry struck at the precise moment, shattering the cohesion of the enemy's center. The ensuing panic spread like wildfire through the Ottoman ranks. Soldiers who had fought bravely in previous campaigns were now caught in a tide of fear and confusion, unable to rally against the shock and awe of the Allied forces. Officers attempted to restore order, shouting commands across the battlefield, but their voices were drowned out by the cacophony of retreat and the pounding hooves of pursuing cavalry. Kara Mustafa Pasha, the architect of the siege, faced the ultimate humiliation. His careful planning, his vast numbers, and his confidence in the inevitability of victory had all crumbled before the skill and audacity of Sobieski and the Holy League. Witnessing his army unravel, he realized that the siege he had invested months in orchestrating was lost. Panic spread among the commanders and soldiers alike. Lines dissolved, units scattered, and cohesion vanished. Retreat became the only option, though even that was chaotic and perilous. The Ottoman forces, so organized in prior engagements, were now a disorganized mass, fleeing for their lives across the plains and through the forests of Hungary. The rout was catastrophic. Entire regiments disappeared from the battlefield, either captured or slain in the chaos. Artillery pieces, supply wagons, and provisions were abandoned, leaving the survivors with little more than the clothes on their backs and the mounts they could manage to escape on. Soldiers, exhausted from weeks of siege and now terrified by the ferocity of the Allied attack, stumbled through the countryside. Desertion became rampant. Those who could break away from the pursuing forces often did so, leaving comrades behind to fend for themselves. The Ottoman army, which had once seemed invincible, was reduced to a shadow of its former self. The Allied forces, while triumphant, pursued the fleeing enemy with measured ferocity. Sobieski understood that allowing the Ottomans to regroup could prolong the threat, so light cavalry and mobile units harried the retreating forces. These pursuits prevented the Ottomans from establishing new defensive positions and ensured that the rout became a complete and humiliating defeat. Soldiers of the Holy League seized artillery, captured prisoners, and inflicted further losses on the already broken Ottoman ranks. The battlefield was a scene of both jubilation and horror, testament to the brutal cost of warfare and the devastating consequences of collapse under pressure. Among the chaos, the human cost of the rout became painfully visible. Thousands of soldiers lay dead or dying, strewn across fields that had only hours before been the stage for organized formations and strategic maneuvers. Horses, wounded or exhausted, littered the ground, and the cries of the wounded echoed across the plains. Survivors recounted tales of comrades lost in the frenzy, of commanders attempting in vain to regroup their troops, and of the overwhelming sense of despair that had overtaken the army. The rout was total. Not merely a tactical withdrawal, but a complete psychological collapse that shattered morale for years to come. The psychological impact of the defeat extended beyond the battlefield. The Ottoman Empire had been a symbol of unstoppable power and conquest for decades. Feared across Europe and Asia, news of the rout at Vienna spread quickly, sending shockwaves through Ottoman territories and among its allies. The loss was more than military. It was a blow to prestige, honor, and the aura of invincibility that the empire had cultivated. Sultan Mehmed Umpat, far from the battlefield, received reports that stunned him. His grand army had been shattered, and Europe had endured a decisive, humiliating victory over Ottoman forces. For the defenders of Vienna, the rout was a moment of triumph beyond imagination. The weeks of fear, starvation, and relentless bombardment were finally rewarded. Soldiers and civilians alike emerged from the city walls to witness the fleeing enemy, to reclaim their streets, and to tend to the wounded and dead. The relief brought by Sobieski and the Holy League was not merely strategic, it was a moral and psychological victory, proving that courage, unity, and decisive leadership could overcome even the most formidable of foes. The Ottoman retreat also had significant strategic consequences. The empire's expansion into Central Europe was halted for decades. Territories that might have fallen under Ottoman control remained secure, and the Habsburg Empire stabilized in the wake of its dramatic survival. For Poland, Sobieski's leadership enhanced the nation's prestige and secured his place as one of Europe's greatest military leaders. The collapse of the Ottoman army demonstrated the limits of sheer numbers and highlighted the decisive impact of elite forces, tactical ingenuity, and well-timed action. Even in the aftermath, stories of heroism and valor from both sides emerged. Allied soldiers recounted the courage of those who had held the lines within Vienna, the skill of infantry and artillery crews, and the sheer audacity of the Winged Hussars charge that had triggered the rout. Ottoman accounts, while acknowledging defeat, detailed moments of bravery and resilience, even amid the chaos. These stories became part of the enduring legend of the Battle of Vienna, immortalizing both the catastrophic collapse of the Ottoman forces and the extraordinary efforts that had brought it about. The rout of the Ottoman army at Vienna in 1683 was more than a battlefield event. It was a turning point in European history. It marked the end of Ottoman attempts to dominate Central Europe, preserving the cultural, political, and religious landscape of the continent. The psychological blow to the Ottomans, coupled with the demonstration of effective coalition warfare by the Holy League, reshaped the balance of power. It became a symbol of hope for European nations, showing that even the most formidable adversaries could be defeated through courage, strategy, and decisive action. By the time darkness fell over the battlefield, the Ottoman army had effectively ceased to exist as a coherent fighting force. Survivors limped home, leaders regrouped in distant fortresses, and the victorious allies consolidated their position. Vienna, battered but unbroken, stood as a monument to endurance, sacrifice, and the extraordinary courage of those who refused to surrender. The collapse and rout of the Ottoman forces became the defining moment of the siege, cementing the Battle of Vienna as one of the most pivotal encounters in European history. The Battle of Vienna in 1683 was not merely a momentary military victory. It became a defining event that reshaped the trajectory of Europe for centuries to come. As the dust settled over the battlefield and the echoes of the Winged Hussars' charge faded into memory, the implications of the triumph were immediately evident. The Ottoman Empire, long perceived as an unstoppable force advancing into the heart of Europe, had been decisively halted. This victory symbolized a turning point, marking the beginning of the gradual decline of Ottoman expansion in Europe, and the rise of European powers united against a common adversary. The immediate impact of the battle on Central Europe was profound. Vienna, once under the shadow of imminent conquest, emerged battered but unbroken, a testament to the resilience of its defenders and the valor of the Allied forces. The city's survival ensured that Austria remained a stable political and cultural center in the region, providing a bulwark against further Ottoman incursions. Beyond the walls of Vienna, the psychological and strategic consequences rippled across the continent. European states, long divided by religious, political, and territorial disputes, witnessed firsthand the effectiveness of united action against a formidable foe. This realization fostered a new sense of collaboration, leading to the strengthening of alliances like the Holy League and setting a precedent for cooperative defense that would influence European geopolitics for decades. The battle's significance extended beyond immediate military and political outcomes. It became a symbol of the resilience and courage of Christendom in the face of overwhelming odds. The defenders of Vienna and the arriving forces of Sobieski embodied the virtues of strategic vision, unity, and unyielding determination. These qualities resonated throughout Europe, inspiring leaders and citizens alike. The story of the Winged Hussars' legendary charge, in particular, captured the imagination of people across the continent, cementing the narrative of European heroism and the defense of civilization against external threats. Vienna's survival was thus not only a practical military success, but also a powerful cultural and psychological milestone. The consequences of the battle were felt deeply within the Ottoman Empire as well. The rout at Vienna marked a significant blow to Ottoman prestige and military reputation. For decades, the empire had projected power and intimidation across Europe, relying on its disciplined forces and strategic brilliance to secure victories. However, the defeat at Vienna shattered the perception of invincibility. The empire's leadership was forced to reassess its ambitions in Central Europe, curtailing plans for further expansion westward. Over time, the loss at Vienna contributed to the gradual contraction of Ottoman influence in the region, shifting the balance of power in favor of European states. The psychological impact of this defeat reverberated for generations, reminding the empire that even the most disciplined armies could falter under the right combination of strategy, timing, and unity among opponents. The battle also left a lasting legacy in terms of military strategy and tactics. Scholars and commanders across Europe studied the events at Vienna for centuries, analyzing the coordination between infantry, artillery, and cavalry, as well as the decisive use of elite units like the Winged Hussars. Sobieski's ability to synchronize his forces, exploit terrain, and time his actions with precision became a case study in effective leadership and battlefield innovation. The siege and relief of Vienna demonstrated the critical importance of morale, communication, and timing in warfare, principles that would influence European military doctrine long after the cannons fell silent. Vienna itself became a symbol of endurance and strategic importance. The city's survival ensured that it remained a vital center for trade, culture, and governance, shaping the political landscape of Central Europe. Its resilience encouraged other European cities and states to fortify themselves against potential threats, leading to advancements in military architecture, defensive strategy, and urban planning. The memory of the siege, combined with the dramatic relief by Sobieski's forces, created a lasting narrative of courage and resistance that permeated European art, literature, and historical memory. Paintings, poems, and chronicles celebrated the heroism of those involved, reinforcing the cultural significance of the battle for generations. The alliance forged during the Battle of the Holy League set an important precedent for European diplomacy and military cooperation. States that had long been rivals now recognized the value of unity in the face of existential threats. The collaborative defense against the Ottomans demonstrated that coordinated military action could achieve what individual efforts could not, inspiring future coalitions and joint ventures in European conflicts. This legacy of cooperation extended beyond the battlefield, influencing political alliances and shaping the balance of power in Europe for decades and even centuries to come. Religiously and culturally, the Battle of Vienna resonated across Europe as a triumph of Christendom. While the conflict itself was driven by territorial and strategic ambitions, it was framed in contemporary accounts as a defense of European civilization against Ottoman encroachment. This narrative strengthened the resolve of European powers to resist further Ottoman advances and fostered a sense of shared identity among states that might otherwise have been divided by language, culture, or religion. Churches, monuments, and commemorations emerged to celebrate the victory, embedding the memory of the battle into the collective consciousness of Europe. Sobieski's leadership and the courage of his troops became enduring symbols of this unity and resilience. The long-term geopolitical consequences were equally profound. The failure of the Ottoman Empire to capture Vienna halted their westward expansion and set the stage for European powers, particularly the Habsburgs and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, to consolidate influence in Central Europe. The shift in the balance of power contributed to the eventual decline of Ottoman dominance in the region, while simultaneously empowering European states to pursue expansion, trade, and cultural development with greater security. Vienna's survival allowed Austria to remain a central player in European politics, diplomacy, and military affairs, influencing the course of European history for centuries. Moreover, the battle demonstrated the critical importance of leadership, innovation, and decisive action in shaping historical outcomes. Sobieski's foresight, tactical brilliance, and personal courage proved decisive in altering the course of the siege. The effective coordination between diverse forces, the timing of the Winged Hussars charge, and the steadfast defense of Vienna collectively ensured that the Ottoman threat was neutralized. These lessons transcended the specifics of the battle, offering enduring insights into strategy, resilience, and the interplay between courage and circumstance in determining historical destiny. In the centuries that followed, the Battle of Vienna became a touchstone for historians, military leaders, and cultural commentators. It was celebrated not merely as a military victory but as a defining moment that preserved European civilization from potential subjugation. The stories of heroism, strategic genius, and collective effort continued to inspire generations, becoming embedded in national narratives, educational curricula, and popular imagination. Monuments, paintings, and literary works commemorated the events, ensuring that the legacy of Vienna would never fade from memory. Ultimately, the Battle of Vienna in 1683 was more than a singular event. It was a turning point in history. It halted the advance of one of the most powerful empires of the time, secured the survival of key European states, and reshaped the geopolitical landscape of the continent. The courage of defenders, the strategic brilliance of Sobieski, and the unity of the Holy League demonstrated that, even against overwhelming odds, decisive action, preparation, and collaboration could alter the course of history. The legacy of Vienna remains a testament to the enduring impact of courage, leadership, and the will to defend civilization against seemingly unstoppable forces. The Battle of Vienna in 1683 stands as one of the most decisive moments in European history. It was a clash of empires, a dramatic confrontation where courage, strategy, and unity overcame overwhelming odds. The Ottoman Empire, which had threatened to sweep across Central Europe, was halted, and Vienna survived against all expectations. King John III, Sobieski, the legendary Winged Hussars, and the combined forces of the Holy League not only saved a city but reshaped the destiny of a continent. Their bravery and tactical brilliance ensured that Europe would remain a bastion of culture, faith, and political resilience, inspiring generations to come. This epic battle reminds us that history is shaped not only by numbers and power but by vision, determination, and timely action. The courage of the defenders of Vienna, the audacity of Sobieski's cavalry, and the unity of nations under a common cause highlight lessons that transcend time. Leadership matters, alliances matter, and the actions of a few can change the fate of many. The Legacy of Vienna is a testament to human resilience, reminding us that even in the face of immense danger, the combination of skill, courage, and strategy can achieve the impossible. If this story of heroism, strategy, and history fascinated you, don't forget to like, comment, and share this video with others who love history. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications to explore more epic battles, legendary leaders, and pivotal moments that shaped the world. Your support helps bring history to life and ensures that the stories of courage, resilience, and victory continue to inspire people everywhere. Thank you for joining us on this journey back to 1683, witnessing the courage, brilliance, and determination that saved Vienna and altered the course of Europe forever. Remember, history is not just about the past, it's about the lessons we carry into the future. Stay curious, stay inspired, and keep exploring the epic tales that define our world.